Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics, with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Al Cinders against Bellamy.
It has Jordan. Allen shakes free, gets two!
Gilmore on it.
Stop! Brother.
Lead Toledo artist, you get 21.
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Barry.
Jordan. Open. Chicago with the lead.
Hello and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason Mann, and joining me as always is Rich Kraetsch. Rich, great to be with you.
Yes, nice to see you again. It's been quite a while since we talked. 2 weeks since we finished our marathon of the NBA Finals Game 7 series, and we're finally back at it, though, with yet another arduous, long project. But this one's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot. It's one we've wanted to do forever, pretty much since the moment we started, the idea of doing this podcast. And it's one that we're just going to work through the entire summer. And I don't know if we're going to come to a conclusion. I don't know what the hell we're going to do with it, but it's going to be fun along the way. So that's all I know.
Yeah, we're looking back at the 50 greatest players in NBA history, the list that was compiled in 1996 and was celebrated at the 97 All-Star Game. And the first part of this is what we're going to do is we are going to look back at all 50 players who were chosen, just kind of take a glance at each one, sort of look at them in a new light, thanks to, maybe looking at some advanced stats for those guys that, of course, weren't really around in 96, 97. And just kind of consider them from a wide range of criteria. And, just kind of a purpose is to have fun, to talk about the history of the game that we love. So we're gonna go through the sort of the no-brainers on today's show, you and I, and then we're gonna have Curtis Harris on, and we're gonna do a few shows looking at the other candidates who, if we were gonna redo this list in 2015, who may or may not make the list, based on different things. And then from there, I think we're going to look mostly at post 1997 players and decide, okay, hey, would they be on this list? Would they not be on this list? And why? It's sort of a way, I guess, just to have like a, rich discussion of the history of the game, of current players and kind of where they stand and all those things. And maybe looking at like what the best way is to, evaluate these players.
Sure, and that's going to be one of the issues that we're going to kind of run through with a lot of this, is that we're spanning, all eras here. And it becomes an issue when you try to, how do you connect LeBron James to George Mikan or what? I mean, it's super, super hard. And that's going to be one of the things that we're going to kind of tackle and talk and theorize a little bit about as well, because some people have different methods. We're going to use advanced stats, we're going to use basic stats, but then we're also sometimes just going to have to say, hey, look, like the game is not it's so hard to compare these two guys. So, on its face, a George Mikan type would seem so out of place in today's NBA, just as LeBron would seem out of place, in the 50s NBA. But understand that those guys have to sort of live in their eras, and we can't necessarily plop them into different things and have everybody be in the same NBA, because it's just not possible and not plausible. So that's gonna be fun. It's a nice little kind of fun discussion here. And like I said, I don't know if there's like a truth of, okay, we have come up with the definitive top 50 and all of you are wrong or something like that. But it's gonna be fun to kind of get different people's opinions. And that's one thing throughout this entire series that we'd love to hear, is that immediately following a podcast, if you listen to it and you say, oh, you guys are completely idiots, like there's no way that guy's a shoo-in or that guy's out or that guy's on the bubble or whatever, we'd love to hear from you. Over and Back NBA, and that's going to be a big part of this entire project, is seeing what people think and what their opinions are of this list, who you would put on post 97, all that sort of stuff. But I'm excited to tackle it and get into it.
Yeah, and if there's something, we talk about a certain player and there's something really important that we, just don't mention that you think might, be worth changing our mind on somebody individually, that would be great too, or that kind of thing. So we of course would love, any kind of feedback that we can get on this type of stuff, and pointing us to information that we may not have considered. We're absolutely we're up for discussion on basically any aspect of this, no matter how obscure or nutty. I think we're going to try to be try to be there.
Yeah, it's our summer project, so we have plenty of time until, because we could break down NBA free agency, and we might do a few shows otherwise throughout the summer, but this is our big focus. This entire off season is this, and the entire summer is this sort of project and this top 50. So yeah, we have plenty of time to go over every little nuanced whatever you want as far as it relates to the top 50 list. So
absolutely. So so today we're going to talk about the basically the no-brainers, the guys who are absolutely in that, without any argument or much of an argument at all. I know there's a few players that I think we're going to look at a little bit more deeply that maybe there could be a qualification, but these are basically players who you would say were top 5 in the league for about 5 years and top 10 in the league for about 10 years. That was kind of the criteria that we went with as far as guys who, are basically shoo-ins that don't require, too much additional discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got a few other criteria as well. We're going to look, as I mentioned, at advanced stats. And for people that aren't really familiar, I'm not going to kind of run down what each one of these stats mean and all that sort of stuff. We're just going to kind of, say them throughout this. And if you're interested in what they mean and how they were calculated and whatnot, feel free to look it up. Basketball Reference is a great resource for all these. Anywhere, I mean, there's plenty of other sites as well, but Basketball Reference would be your top one, and that's where we got all of our information from for this project. But yeah, we're going to talk win shares per 48, value over replacement player, VORP, box plus minus, BPM, PER, the player efficiency rating. So you're going to hear those. Like I said, I don't want to spend every single time explaining what each of those are. So if you're curious, if you're not aware, and you're saying, oh, what the hell is this value over replacement player they're talking about, feel free to look it up on Basketball Reference, and they do a great job of breaking down, the calculation almost to a painstaking degree of exactly what goes into it. But if you don't really care, we're just going to kind of mention those as well as a part of the package. And then counting stats as well, being top 20 in a certain points per game and a certain, leaderboards and all-time leaderboards and awards and all that sort of stuff, MVPs, all NBA, all defensive team, all that sort of stuff. And being an important part of good teams as well, I think is an important distinction to make, being one of the top 2 players on a winning team, being the best player on a team that wins, a title, being, even being second fiddle on numerous title teams. It all sort of counts, and it's all part of the package that we're going to kind of break down with every one of these candidates. So
yeah, and I think we'll definitely consider somewhat of like, okay, was this guy really influential? Was he really important? And also things like, okay, peak production versus longevity. I mean, was this guy, he was good for a few years but maybe didn't have a long career. How do we weigh this versus, okay, this guy maybe didn't quite have the same peak, but he was just so good for so much longer. And it'll obviously be depend on the individual case. And, I don't know if we'll be 100% consistent about it because it's always hard to consider those things, but we'll definitely, that's sort of kind of what we'll be looking at. For sure.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we can be, consistent and bipartisan and stuff like that about, counting stats and top 20 and that sort of stuff. But things like influence and that sort of stuff's always going to have a little bit of minutia to it. So it's going to be sort of, yeah, like you said, it's going to be, those are going to sort of be case by case things where we're going to have to talk at a little bit more length and that sort of, because it wouldn't be fun if we just did a list of, okay, here's win shares, okay, here's the top 50 win shares, the end. Like, that's not very fun. Or, oh, yeah, these guys are, points per game plus, assists plus rebound. Okay, we figured it out. We're done. Okay, that's it. So it's going to be a little bit more nuance to that of these guys, because that makes it a little bit more fun, I think. I mean, from my standpoint, obviously, if you listen to the show, I'm very big in, advanced stats and statistics, but I understand when we're doing a list like this and the way we're setting this list up is that we're going to put in factors like team success, like the success that, that player achieved. And then also, like you mentioned, influence, like a guy, changing the game in some sense, being a player that people remember, being, a big part of the game for whatever period he was. That all that stuff's really important. So it's all going to kind of come into this list as well.
Absolutely. So shall we begin?
Yeah, let's do it. I can't wait for our very heated argument about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's inclusion in this list.
Absolutely, yes. He was, of course, a center, played from 1970 to 1989, 6 times MVP, 10-time All-NBA.
That's not too many.
Yeah.
That's not a lot. I mean, come on. What about all those other years, Kareem?
Yeah, the other 14 years we did not win.
Yeah,
the
he's got
MVP. That's
14
what we
years
should
we
really
did win
focus on.
MVP. So right, I
Yes.
mean, why we always talk about these 6 MVPs? Let's talk about the 14 other years. What are you doing, Kareem?
That's your hot take of the day so far.
No, I'm done. That's it.
And 10-time All-NBA first team, 5-time All-NBA second team, first all-time in win shares, and 7th all-time in win shares per 48. The most points, games, and minutes in NBA history. Also made 10 NBA finals and won 6 NBA championships. So,
and he's on my TV right now in a Travel Wisconsin commercial.
Oh, nice.
It's very bizarre. I look up. I read Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I look up, and there he is.
Yeah,
riding a plane and telling me to go to Wisconsin.
Yeah, ironic that Kareem would be, touting Wisconsin these days since he wanted to get out so bad.
It's the irony of this commercial of, just come to Wisconsin. It's a great state is the greatest thing ever.
Maybe he just likes visiting. Yeah.
Visit Wisconsin. Don't live here. It's terrible. But
come for a week.
But I believe Kareem should probably stay on the list and was a very good choice. So there, I think that's exhausted our Kareem discussion that we could possibly have. So
absolutely. And next is Charles Barkley, one of the greatest power forwards ever, played from 85 to 2000. Won an MVP, was 5-time All-NBA first team, 5-time All-NBA second team, and once was NBA third team. 16th all-time in win shares, 9th win shares per 48. The only thing that would knock him down a little bit to me is, he didn't quite have the longevity of some of, like a Duncan or Karl Malone. I mean, basically by any other standard, he is, he had a long, extensive career. But other than that, he obvioly was outstanding.
Yeah, he's got a pretty clean resume here. It'd be hard to fucking argue. I mean, yeah, you can maybe in 30, 40 years when you and I get back on these waves and discuss that list, then maybe we can sort of talk about it or whatever. But at this point, right now, I mean, there's no way you could either bump him off or think of him as anything but a great candidate for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Next is our old friend Rick Barry, who we did our first podcast on, and played small.
Willed the Warriors to a championship.
Yeah, 1975 Warriors championship. Yeah, who led to our inspiring the 2015 Warriors.
Exactly right. I'm still taking credit for that. I still tell all my friends. Yeah, well, the real reason they won is.
Yep. Yeah. Small forward, played from 1966 to 1980. Spent 4 years in the ABA during that time. Was actually first team player all 4 of those years for the ABA. Also a 5-time All NBA first team and a 1-time All NBA second team. 38th all time in win shares, 63rd in win shares per 48. So a little bit low on the win shares per 48 list. I mean, still very good, but not within the top 50. But I still think he's comfortably in. Obviously, I don't know if there's anything that you have to add to that.
Not really. I think he is, and again, he might be a guy like Barkley, where some years down the line, maybe you can start a discussion about him or whatever. But for right now, I mean, there's no, especially 5-team all NBA first team and the ABA stuff. We're going to count. Obviously as a big part of this project as well.
Right.
And
I'm unclear as to whether that was considered for the
I don't know.
The NBA. Yeah. But I think it's certainly worth counting. I mean, I think it changes a few players' resume, but I don't think necessarily, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, is a make or break kind of thing. But
I think Barry, even regardless of those, I mean, I'm using that to sort of sweeten his resume. I think regardless of those, he's still probably up there. But yeah, I mean the making the all ABA team every single year that he was in the league. I think absolutely Rick Barry is a perfect candidate. And yeah, like I said, years down the line, if you want to bring it up and maybe there's a discussion about him in 20 years. But right now, no, there's definitely not.
Elgin Baylor is next and played small forward 1959 to 72 for the Lakers. 10-time All-NBA first team. The thing that he's lacking a little bit is in the advanced stats. He's 72nd all-time in win shares and 105th in win shares per 48. And that kind of gave you pause a little bit.
Yeah, I was a little bit interested, and we sort of were going back and forth about a few of these guys, and one of your questions, at least with Elgin Baylor, is, why do advanced stats not match up to his reputation? Why do we sort of assume, and rightfully so, we assume that Elgin Baylor is a top 50 player of all time, and I don't really have a huge argument with that either, but you look at advanced stats and you kind of go, oh, yeah, I don't know. Like, it's a little interesting, because we ran some numbers here, and all players with 50-plus win shares, 17 PER, and .100 win shares per 48 through 1972. So those are, Elgin Baylor stats. How does he rank sort of with those guys? He's 11th in win shares, 8th in PER, and then 29th in win shares per 48. He's also 6th in overall points of those, 6th in rebounds, and 8th in assists. So he's got a weird resume in the sense that, in overall numbers and longevity sort of stuff, he does quite well. But per like efficiency stuff and like the win shares per 48 and per minute stuff, he doesn't grade out very well. Like you said, 105th in win shares per 48 all time, which is, not a particularly great number. I mean, it's no slouch, but when we're talking top 50 players of all time and the guy is 105th, you kind of go, oh, geez, that's kind of weird. The biggest thing with him, and that's sort of something we're going to have to sort of tackle a little bit as we go on with this, is he played in an era where, it was a little bit different we know now that, guys are super aware of the efficiency of shots. And I'm not just going to chuck up shots and give up possessions and do all this sort of stuff. Every shot I take has to count. It should be from the best spot on the floor. It should be the best shot possible. Whereas other eras, education-wise, obviously it's always been put the ball in the basket, and the guy that puts the ball in the basket more is probably better than the guy who doesn't. But there's a little less, comfort there. I'm not sure the exact word, but whereas Elgin Baylor, he's 24th, among that data set of guys that we brought up in field goal percentage, 15th in free throw percentage. And he's just hurt, by those a lot of just not being a very efficient scorer, efficient shooter as he went on. Also, some other things too. He's hurt by having a lot of mediocre seasons mixed in with his elite ones. His 59-60, 60-61, and 62-63 seasons are great. They're like elite level, awesome, great. In between those, though, he has a lot of mediocre ones. He's below 5 win shares in 64-65 and 65-66. And then from age 28 to his final year in age 37, he never had another 10-plus win share season, which is, that's not like, that's very hard to do, is get 10-plus win shares. But the fact that he went that long, almost, he went 8 years, without having that, in the tail end of his career, really hurts those kind of efficiency numbers and the win shares per 48 and all that sort of stuff. He only got close in 68-69 when he had 8.5 win shares. So not a total slouch again, but yeah, he had trouble getting to that elite level again after those 3 seasons. So he's an interesting one. I want to say yeah for sure, but he's one that I almost want to put on like a little asterisk just to kind of look at a little bit more. Whereas if we have a strong case to replace him with a bunch of other guys, maybe he's one that we talk about. But it's interesting because it's hard to say because it's Elgin Baylor, and you're like, no, that's really weird. But it's kind of unraveling in this project and looking at those advanced stats. He kind of, you start bringing up some questions about him.
Yeah, and he had a pretty severe injury in the 65 playoffs, a knee injury, and he was never quite the same player after that. It was still was good, and and volume wise he was an incredible. He still produced very well, but I mean, you're right. Even by the standards of his era, he was a bit of a chucker. He did one thing I'll say about the influence aspect, and I don't know how much exactly I consider this, but he was really the first. I mean, he kind of began the tradition that sort of continued with Connie Hawkins and continued with Julius Erving and continued with Jordan as far as just being like the do-it-all, like above the rim superstar who can score and who can pass and who can, get the ball to the basket and was just amazingly athletic and could dunk incredibly. And, he wasn't, he was the guy who sort of, he took that to another level and inspired, a lot of other players, as well. And that's worth something. I don't know exactly how much it's worth. But yeah, I mean, I think we both have, it's hard to imagine Elgin Baylor not making our final list. I mean, I would say that's almost impossible, but it is, I think, worth, one thing about this project, it's worth, taking, for lack of a better term, sacred cows and looking at them a little bit more deeply and saying, well, okay, maybe we can, at least talk about it and have a conversation about, where that value is and how well the numbers do it at looking at him and what else we need to consider and all that kind of stuff.
So he might be one to sort of add to another list that we'll bring up later. But yeah, as far as him, I mean, like you said, it's very hard to envision this list without him. But and that's the point of this, is to kind of bring up some discussions about guys, because it wouldn't be any fun if we just said, yeah, everyone's good, perfect list, the end. So
yeah, exactly. So next is Larry Bird, played small forward mostly, some power forward actually early in his career from 1980 to 92. 3-time MVP, of course, led the Celtics team to 3 championships, 9-time All-NBA first team, 1 time on the second team, 26th in win shares and 19th in win shares per 48. Not really much argument against Larry Bird, I'm going to guess.
Not really. No, I think he is a worthy candidate. Yeah, he's another one. That, I mean, what can you really do? I mean, I don't think he's ever going to be up for a real big debate on this. I mean, that's I mean, that's like an elite guy. I mean, that's he's top 50.
Yeah,
probably forever. I don't see any. I don't envision. Yeah, I don't envision anybody bumping him off. But we'll see.
Obviously the influence of him and Magic, you transforming the popularity of the game.
I mean, from that, even if you want to make an argument statistically, and again, you're probably never going to win that argument. Even if you want to do that, I'm still going to say, okay, well, yeah, he basically was one of the primary people of taking the NBA out of the doldrums into this era, right? And they're about to sign, a $10 trillion TV deal. Like, yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah, he's there. So
yeah,
it's not 10 trillion. It's actually like 26 billion, isn't it? What is the exact number?
A lot. I don't know.
It's ungodly. Yes,
it's a lot. Yeah, I don't know.
It's better than a tape delayed NBA Finals. So that's
it certainly is. Next is Wilt Chamberlain, center from 1960 to 73. Only one MVP, which is kind of, I mean, I've realized that, but it was like, oh yeah, only one time MVP. 7-time All-NBA first teams though, 3-time on the second team, second all-time in win shares and third win shares per 48. Most rebounds of all time, was the leading scorer of all time when he retired. Of course, would pass by Kareem and a couple other people now. Despite not having the same kind of team success as Bill Russell, still led two amazing teams, two of the greatest individual one-season teams in history, 2 championships, and had a wonderful career.
Yeah, Wilt's no argument for Wilt ever.
Yeah,
that's a shoo-in forever. So.
Yeah, and maybe most dominant player, if you consider how just he smashed his era of all time. He's certainly in that conversation.
Yeah. It's going to be very hard for you to make an argument against Wilt. So yeah, I will not. So you can go ahead.
Here's another one that we'll have a little bit of discussion is Bob Cousy, who point guard for the helped lead the early Boston Celtics dynasty, played from 51 to 63, was a one-time MVP, 10-time All-NBA first team, twice on the second team, but another guy whose advanced statistics, not so great. 99th all-time in win shares, 145th in win shares per 48. What did you find, kind of delving deep into his career?
Yeah, similar to Elgin Baylor and almost on a bigger sense is Cousy's shooting really hurts, in terms of these sort of stats and win shares per 48. And, you kind of get pause for a second and go, okay, look, on an overall sense, yeah, point guards that day, guards of that day, they weren't great shooters. They weren't really told to shoot as much or whatever. So what I want to do, though, is kind of look at Cousy compared with other guards of his era. So I did pre-70 guards and sort of looked at them. And he grades out a little bit better, in that class. He's 6th in win shares among those, 10th in win shares per 48. But that data set is only out of 18. So we're talking still, and these are high caliber guards. I should preface, I'm not doing every single guard, pre-70s, but ones that had high win shares. But what's interesting though is he's 18th in this data set in field goal percentage, so that's dead last. He's 7th in free throw percentage, so he really struggles from that sense of just the shooting is not good, and it's bad even for his era, and it's bad comparable to his position and all that sort of stuff. When you look at guards with 90 plus career win shares, so again, that's no slouch, that's a lot of win shares. But when you look at that, Cousy, he's 32nd in win shares among that. He's 34th, which is last in field goal percentage, 14th in points per game, and then 9th in assists per game. So it's interesting. He doesn't really, from from an analytical standpoint and that sort of stuff, he doesn't rise above guards, pre-1970. He doesn't rise above guards of his era. He doesn't rise above, elite level guards, but he's an elite level guard. So you sort of get into that weird thing. Like, I mentioned like 90 plus career win shares for a guard. Cousy's in that class, and that's still worth something. So it's still, but it's interesting of is he an elite of that group, and sort of how do we judge him based off this? I mean, again, by pure influence and pure looking at the list and going, yeah, it's got it. Bob Cousy has to be on the list or whatever. But he's another one that when you kind of dig into it, the advanced stats a little bit and look at it, you go, huh? I mean, I don't really know. He never had a win share season above 10 or even 9, so that's pretty interesting as well. That he sort of was always okay, always really good, but never really elite or great. Historically bad field goal percentage definitely hurts him stat wise. And a few other things among guards with 50-plus career win shares. Cousy is second to last. It's 123rd among guards, with that 50-plus career win shares and field goal percentage. Only Andy Phillips, 38%, is worse. So that's not a great class to keep. And then, I sort of wanted to look a little bit at guards of that era as well, because you sort of brought up a question, and it's a good one as well, is that was poor shooting sort of typical from guards at the time, and should we really, take that against Cousy if whatever, stuff like that. And I yes or no is kind of what I came up with. And there are plenty of guards who had worse percentage than him, but he's still 59th among guards who played 250 more games during his era, so that's 51 to 70. And then he's a little worse, so it's sort of where he ranks in terms of field goal percentage again amongst guards of his era, which is 51 to 70. He's a little worse than Guy Rodgers and a little bit better than Al Bianchi. So he's kind of in that. It's interesting. And then if we look at true shooting percentage, which obviously takes into account free throw shooting, it bumps Cousy up to 50th out of 59, or up from 59. So again, it's interesting. I mean, how much do we sort of, because I think it's hard to have a list, a top 50 list without Bob Cousy, but you look at some stuff like that, and how much do we weigh sort of advanced stats? How much do we weigh shooting efficiency and that sort of stuff when we make this list? Because I really don't know, and that's going to be something we might have to tackle as we go on here. But it was very interesting to see him sort of reveal himself when we started doing this, research. So,
and I think the comparison to guys whose contemporaries is the most interesting, because you can't really judge him by modern standards. Some of these advanced stats sort of balance that a little bit, so there you can do some apples to apples comparisons, at least to a degree. But I would, again, obviously I would lean toward putting him in, but this does give me a little bit of pause. I'm like, what does that mean? What else do I need to understand about Bob Cousy to, before, while considering all these different factors? All right. And next we have Julius Erving, who small forward, played from 1972 to 87, mostly with the 76ers. Had one NBA MVP and 3 ABA MVPs. Combined has 9 all NBA and ABA first teams and 3 second teams. 12th all time in win shares and 25th in win shares per 48. In addition, of course, just has tremendous influence and style and imagination as one of the great dunkers in NBA history, particularly for his time.
Yeah, there's not a top 50 list without Julius Erving. I mean, that's just a no-brainer, absolute no-brainer.
Yeah, he even rates a little bit better than I expected in the advanced metrics.
I was kind of surprised too. I thought he would be kind of one of those, and we've seen this throughout the process, and we'll talk more in future episodes about this. Is a lot of those guys that we consider the shooting guards, or the guards that could shoot, or the guard forwards that could shoot, or whatever. Those guys tend to be, in advanced stats, especially, in the era that Erving played, all those guys tend to be not rated nearly as well as we would sort of think or hope, or that points per game would tell us or whatever. But not Erving. I mean, he checks out in win shares. He checks out in win shares per 48. He checks out in true shooting. Just everything you can kind of think of. So yeah, like he's an absolute no-brainer for this list.
Yeah. Next is John Havlicek, shooting guard and small forward. Played from 63 to 78, 4 times on the All-NBA first team, 7 times on the second team, had a lot of longevity, particularly for the era that he played, and 34th in win shares, 161st in win shares for 48, so that's not as strong. And I know you kind of had some issues with maybe having him be a definite on the list.
Yeah, I think you can make a somewhat of a case for him, and maybe it's not a definite, maybe we just move him down to, one of the likely or one that we kind of talk a little bit later about. But yeah, the advanced numbers don't jump out for Havlicek, and it's not just strictly because of his numbers or his minutes, because you look at, the win shares per 48, and like I said, or you said, once 161st in that category, he actually does better in pure win shares than he does when you do it by minute based. In comparison to league, I did it also. Comparison to league pre-1979. So looking at kind of the league before him to see sort of how he ranked among those. This is guards and forwards, of course. He's 17th in field goal percentage. He's 20th in true shooting, 24th in win shares per 48, and 8th in win shares. So while that's pretty good, it's tough to say because that's strictly, pre-1979, just his position. And he's not jumping off the board on those, but he's at least above average. So there's something there. The first 7 years of his career, he had no win share years above 9. Then he had 4 straight from 69 to 73, followed by 5 more under 10. So it's interesting. He had a super high peak, but took a while to get there. And then once he got there, he was there for a little bit, and then he kind of fell down again and was just sort of okay. But, doing this and looking at it, he's a guy that I've sort of wavered on as I've gone. Like, and when we were first done, I said, I don't know, maybe we can kind of put him on the maybe list or a guy to look at. Then I look at that peak. I mean, that peak was spectacular, the one that he had, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. And the criteria we're using is it rewards a guy who, A, is on winning teams, which, of course, Havlicek was, a big part of title teams, of course, Havlicek was, and then a guy who had a spectacular peak but didn't fall completely off a cliff. And I think that describes Havlicek in a lot of ways. Is he a guy that I would say is a shoo-in? I don't know if he's a shoo-in, but is he a guy when it's all said and done that probably will still make the list? I do think so, but I at least think there's some sort of – we can bring him up in sort of an argument before we immediately just say, no doubter, he's definitely in. And that's basically all I wanted to – I'm not striking him off the list immediately, but a guy that at least we could probably discuss or look at a little bit further if we wanted to.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think the one thing that, his first 4 or 5 seasons, he came off the bench, as the sixth man for the, so that does deflate those win share. He probably would have been able to contribute more had he been given the chance to do so. But then again, he did, he contributed quite a bit, in his older years as well. Being a part of that team might deflate, that his totals a little bit, although his totals overall are very strong because he had such a long career. So it's kind of an interesting mix of things. I think that's fair that, maybe moving him to like very likely as opposed to absolutely in is a fair thing, even though he does check that box of, as far as the things that we kind of said for shoo-ins. But I think, looking at him a little more, I think is absolutely fair. Next we have Magic Johnson. Who is in?
I think he is.
Yeah, he's definitely in. Played point guard. Actually, he was listed as a shooting guard his first 4 seasons, which I thought was interesting. Norm Nixon, being the point guard, which I knew they shared duty. Played from 80 to 91. And then made it in 96 in which he played power forward. So a lot of versatility there, of course. Famously, he started Game 6 of the 1980 finals at center. 3-time MVP, 9-time All-NBA first team, once on the second team, was 23rd in win shares, and 8th in win shares per 48. Obviously one of the greats along with Bird, who led the NBA to explode in popularity. Not much needs to be said. 5 championships, I believe 9 finals appearances in his career in just 12 seasons. So good stuff.
Yeah, he's in. I don't think you're gonna get much of an argument here ever. Yeah. So yeah.
Speaking of not much of an argument, Michael Jordan.
I don't know about that. No. Well, this is gonna be the hot take of the day. No.
Yeah, shooting guard from 85 to 2003. He did miss almost 5 seasons in the midst of those, but a 5-time MVP, also was once Defensive Player of the Year, 10-time All-NBA first team, once second team, 4th in win shares all time and 1st in win shares per 48. Many people's choice for greatest NBA player of all time. He's certainly, the favorite in that conversation. So he's in.
Yes. No, I don't think we need to spend any moments on him. Yes.
Karl Malone, power forward from 1986-2004, 2-time MVP. One of those might have been a little sketchy, but he was very good that year, very close to Jordan's level. 11-time All-NBA first team, twice in the second team, once in the third team, 3rd all-time in win shares, 18th in win shares per 48. Tremendous longevity. One of those guys who managed to still be a really great player in his late 30s. Really only competing with like Duncan and Kareem as far as guys who were still really great at that level so late in their career. Another amazing player.
Yeah, great peak, great longevity. I think a lot of ways the longevity is spectacular for him. I mean, you're talking about a guy who really never I mean, we had that, obviously that one Lakers season, the ill-fated Lakers season. But even then, he was still really, I mean, like, here's a guy who realistically probably could have went a few more years if he really, really wanted to. But he didn't. He kind of left, not, I won't say on top, but semi on top. And just, from peak, from longevity, Karl Malone ticks all the boxes. Just absolutely a shoe-in sure thing for this top 50.
Yeah, I mean, and he suffered, that injury that year that basically ended his career.
I mean,
he came back, but other than that, I mean, and he was also almost never hurt his entire career.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another thing that's just spectacular. You look at, I was firing up earlier and looking at his games and game started or whatever. You look at this year's in 81, 82, 82, 80, 82, 82, 81, 82, 82, 82, 82, 82, 81, 49, lockout, 82, 81, 80, 81, and then 42, even in his final year of like just unbelievable, like long you don't see. I mean, that's just even the most healthy guys. That still just seems insane to have that record for up until his 40 year, his age 40 year, and then just kind of aged gracefully and just kind of went away. And he's a guy that I could have seen going until he's like 43 if he really wanted to. But hey. And he wrestled. I mean, you and I are going to put him extra on the list for his contributions
absolutely.
To WCW Bash at the Beach '98. I mean, that's
a friend of Diamond Dallas Page is a friend of mine.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So next we have Moses Malone, center.
Did not wrestle.
No, did
not in
wrestle.
WCW. That I know of.
Yeah, he could have. He
maybe got into Houston. He might have went into Houston territory. He might have been him and Paul Bosch might have done a few.
Oh, you're losing a lot of our fans right now, Rich.
I know. No, some of them I've gained some of them,
okay.
And it's just people that know us from our previous lives or my other life. But yeah, everybody else is gone, so that's fine. I'll just stop talking now.
All right, center from 1975 to 1995, another guy with tremendous longevity. Although toward the end of his career, last 3 years didn't play much. 3-time NBA MVP, 4-time All-NBA first team, 4-time on the second team, so slightly below the standards of the 5 and 10 rule. But I mean, those 3 MVP, it's very close, and those 3 MVP certainly put it up there. 13th in win shares, 49th in win shares for 48, which is a little bit lower than I would have expected. And yeah, again, a slightly shorter peak than I would have thought, but it was a tremendous peak. And, he was, for when he was dominant, he was really dominant.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy that, I mean, we talk about shoo-ins, and there's some guys that are no doubters. Moses, you kind of have to stop for a second, sort of look at the stuff. But once you're done doing it, he's the guy that absolutely should be in there, deserves to be in there, and a guy that I don't think anybody's going to really make a strong argument that he needs to be, removed or thought about even at a further level. I think he's a pretty good end.
Yeah. Next is George Mikan, center for the Minneapolis Lakers from 49 to 56. Was 6-time All-NBA first team, also the 1948 NBL MVP, which was one of the 2 leagues that merged to form the NBA. There was no NBA MVP until after he retired. Otherwise, he would have won multiple MVPs.
Yes.
Won 5 titles in 6 seasons in the NBA, plus a NBL title in 48. He is 65th in win shares total, but if he had played enough minutes to qualify, he would be 3rd in win shares for 48. The only thing that you could ever say is a negative for him is like, okay, he probably wouldn't be able to play in the modern game, or really even a few years later, once the shot clock was happening, it would have been more difficult for him, and obviously more athletic guys are coming in like Bill Russell and so forth. So he retired probably at the right time, but first of all, who cares? We're talking about guys.
It's a terrible argument. Yeah.
How they played, when they played. And second of all, I think a lot of these guys, you give them modern training and things change a lot. But the greats are pretty much going to be the great no matter what. But even so, I mean, just he lacks the, he didn't, the only other issue is the longevity, but he just dominated the league when he played. So I think he's absolutely a shoo-in for me.
Yeah, for sure. I would say, given his era, given what he did in his era, I mean, that's very important. And we mentioned that at the top of the show, that that's going to be something we're going to have to wrestle with. But the idea that we're judging this off of what guys can do in today's game, or out of their era, or even, a guy like you said with Mike, and it could be 10 years earlier or whatever, we can't hold that against the guys. The guys can only play in the era they play in. Things are, I mean, my God, that's such a silly argument, because then to me, if we did that argument, this entire list would be just the current guys, because I mean, when you talk about modern medicine, modern nutrition, the modern game, these guys be brought up to, I mean, there's so many factors in there that, yeah, it's insane. I mean, LeBron James would score 170 points if he played in Mikan's era or whatever, and Mikan might not get off the bench in today's era. That doesn't make Mikan any less great for his era. I mean, he dominated. You can only dominate the era that you're in. You can only play in the era that you played in. So that argument where we have to kind of, oh, well, what would he do in this era and what would he do in that era? That's silly. I mean, we have these stats, and a few of them do sort of, they account for league averages and stuff. So that helps us a little bit, is okay, what was the league, field goal percentage at this time? What was the league average? Points per game? Those sort of help us judge era, to an extent, but still, a guy like Mikan's case, dominated when he dominated in the era he played. That's all you can ask for. I mean, we can't extrapolate him to any other era or any other thing like that. So that argument is silly, and we will not be making that argument whatsoever. We're going to look at these guys in the era they played and judge them based off that versus anything else. But Mikan is an absolute shoo-in.
Yeah, for sure. And another shoo-in is Shaquille O'Neal, center from 1993 through 2011. Was only 4 years into his career when he was named this list, but clearly proved that he belonged, with the rest of his career. Only won MVP, although he had a couple of years where he certainly, merited that award. Maybe underachieved slightly because of his talent, but still had an amazing career. 8 all NBA first teams, 2 times in the second team, 4 times in the third team, 11th in win shares, 14th in win shares for 48. He, of course, led the Lakers to 3 straight NBA championships. Great stuff.
Yeah. In your mind, if he retired or some horrible injury happened to him immediately after that year when he was named in the top 50, would you still consider him a worthy one, or would that be one where you kind of laugh at and go, oh my God, they really jumped the gun on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he had retired like right at that moment, I don't think that would quite be enough. If he had, I don't know. I mean, I think if he at least like had played, like, let's say through like 2000, 2001 and had a couple of those championships, I think he definitely
get at least a
would
title,
be on it. Right. Because he was really, really, he had a couple of down years, relatively down years in Orlando. He dealt with some injuries and wasn't quite as great. And it took a little bit for him to kind of get back to like those peak levels. But those years, I mean, he was just, incredible in the regular season, and particularly in the finals and in the playoffs. I mean, he just kicked everyone's ass. So, yeah, I don't know exactly which I would say, oh yeah, Shaq's definitely in, but definitely by that Lakers time, if not even maybe a couple seasons before then, just because of that level of performance for that number of years.
Sure. So NBA lucked out, but yeah, it could have gone real south by naming him already. But I get it. I mean, he was a dominant player at that point, a very marketable player, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, he only strengthened his resume in the next 5 years, and then even more in the next 10. So yeah, I absolutely a shoo-in, absolutely deserves to be on the list, and will not be a debate about keeping him on for sure. He's in forever.
Yeah. Next we have Hakeem Olajuwon, played from 85 to 2002, won MVP, twice Defensive Player of the Year, 6-time All-NBA first team, 3-time second team, 3-time third team, 20th in win shares, and 43rd in win shares for 48. Interestingly enough, he's behind Shaq in both those categories, and that's not necessarily something I would have
no, not at all
expected going in. Yeah. And well behind in the win shares for 48. I mean, he's slightly below, what I would have expected. He's below Shaq, and he's below David Robinson in that category. And may be viewed as the best player of all those guys. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure exactly. Maybe Shaq is. I don't know. But
no, see, I would put Hakeem better. And I think one of the problems, and this is where you get some issues with a win shares or win shares for 48 or whatever, is that Shaq. Well, yeah, I would definitely take Hakeem as well, but they really heavily, in terms of efficiency and field goal percentage or whatever, and there was few better than Shaq at that. I mean, that guy could pretty much anytime he wanted to put the ball in the basket, and really didn't get any sort of, and we're talking about Hakeem and Dave Robinson, obviously they were fantastic at it as well, but Shaq is one of the all-time greats at that. I mean, you look at his field goal percentage and it's just stunning how good he was at just he just did not miss many shots. So those stats in a lot of ways will probably overrate him a little bit because of that. And then you can make the argument, okay, is he? I mean, personally, if I was picking a team, I'd probably get Hakeem, but man, those in the early 2000s, there was, those Shaq. I mean, when there was just no other competent big men in there, I mean, just nobody could stop Shaquille O'Neal in that era. In the Western
even
Conference,
good big men, even great big men couldn't stop him. I mean, he was amazing. Yeah,
he was a force.
Right,
you can't really go wrong with any of those three. I don't.
Yeah,
I will flip.
Yeah, Hakeem had his years where, I mean, he played well, but he had, a little bit of a reputation as a head case and a little bit, maybe more just a guy who was difficult to deal with and maybe wasn't trying his hardest. And, he nearly got traded from Houston at one point in the early 90s, I believe. So, he had kind of his demerits as well, despite obviously his great success and his great reputation now. But just sort of interesting, the perception of the two versus the production of the two. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe Shaq is. I guess I'm clouded a little bit by what happened in the 90s with a lot, the Rockets sweeping the Magic pretty easily and Hakeem, outplaying Shaq in that series. I don't know the numbers offhand, but maybe that's a little bit of a part of it. But anyway, just this interesting stuff. Next is Bob Pettit, power forward and center, played from 55 to 65, twice MVP, including the very first NBA MVP, 10-time All-NBA first team, 1-time second team, 31st in win shares, 11th in win shares per 48. I think he's probably the player of his era who is the most unremembered. Underrated, I hate that word. It probably does fit here just because Russell is so well remembered and Wilt obviously and Jerry West and Baylor to an extent, but Pettit was right at that level with all those guys pretty much, and won a championship, beat the Celtics in the second year of their dynasty. Some great stuff, but isn't necessarily thought of in those terms because he didn't play for a team that's kind of viewed as a marquee team. And
yeah, well, like you said, those other guys are kind of like basketball history icons and NBA icons, and Pettit's not. He's just definitely on that. So yeah, I don't know. Underrated might not be the word. I don't know what the word would be, but yeah, those rest of those guys you name, and most people, even the most casual basketball fans, are going to know him. If you mentioned Bob Pettit, I could see a realistic thing where a lot of people would go, who did he play for? Like when did he play? Like I can honestly see that. Like if a bunch of my friends would probably have very little idea about the history of Bob Pettit and where he played and what he did. So yeah, I think there is some credence to what you're talking about, that he's sort of below that icon status, even though, he probably shouldn't be. I mean, he's every bit as good as all those guys. So yeah, I mean, maybe on a little bit different level than, a Russell or whatever, but right up there for sure.
Sure. And next is Oscar Robertson, point guard from 61 to 74 for the Royals and the Bucks. Pettit played for the Hawks, by the way, St. Louis Hawks. Well, for his first year as Milwaukee, the rest of the time was the St. Louis Hawks.
Yes,
Robertson had 1 MVP, 9-time All-NBA first team, 2 times in the second team, forced famously average a season with a triple-double. 10th in win shares all time, 16th in win shares per 48, other than Magic Johnson, probably the greatest point guard of all time. Tremendous player, another one of those, great 60s players who's still remembered ahead of Pettit, although, tremendous player. So, anything more?
Yeah, he grades out well in basically everything you can look at. I mean, in terms of just rate stats, icon status, awards, everything. I mean, winning the MVP, and then the advanced stats, they like him as well. I mean, he's a guy who shot quite a lot, but was efficient at it and worked and yeah, of course the assists and the triple double and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the guy, yeah, he's a shoo-in for this and absolutely an iconic NBA player and one of the best, easily a top 50 all time player.
Yeah. Next is Bill Russell, center from 1957 to 69 with the Celtics, won 11 titles in 3 years, 5-time MVP, although only 3-time All-NBA first team, because the players voted for MVP until 79, I think, and the media did the All-NBA voting, so that was different people choosing. 8 times on the second team. Also was 10-0 in Game 7s and 5-0 in Finals Game 7s.
That's ridiculous. Like, yeah, come on, you can't lose one. You can't like Just one? No. Gotta just win every single one of them. So it's incredible. And we talked about it at length in our Game 7 series. I mean, he kept coming up, and it's like, oh God, the Celtics, but they kept winning. So
yeah. And, even though he was known more as a defensive player than an offensive player, he's still 19th in win shares and 24th in win shares per 48. So yeah, I mean, you can't, not too much more to say about Bill Russell, but
no, yeah, we'd be wasting everyone's time if we spent time discussing the merits of Bill Russell. I mean, the guy, we all know he's a top 50 player and will never be left off a list. There's no scenario where you take him off, a top 50 NBA list and ever, all time, never. He's there.
Yeah. Dolph Schayes, power forward from 1950 to 64 with the Syracuse Nationals. A 6-time All-NBA first team, 6-time on the second team, 29th in win shares, 26th in win shares per 48. So very good in those ways. One of the early stars, maybe guy a little bit forgotten, kind of behind Cousy and behind Mikan, but with them on their level. Won championship in 55, went to another finals or two as well. Just a great player. Probably doesn't help that his team doesn't exist anymore, or they're the Philadelphia 76ers now. So that might be a thing with Pettit too, with moving from St. Louis to Atlanta. You sort of lose your, you don't have the same.
That's a really good point.
Team. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point that, there's not that installed, basketball legacy or, there's guys we'll talk about later, like a Wes Unseld is like Washington basketball, even though, they've changed from the Bullets to the Wizards or whatever. When you think Washington basketball, he's an icon, an iconic figure, an icon in Washington basketball. Yeah, Bob Pettit's sort of without a, and Dolph Schayes is the same way too. Yeah, so I could definitely see that. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Thank you. And last but certainly not least is Jerry West.
The logo. We can't keep the logo out. I mean, come on. That'd be ridiculous.
We cannot. He played point guard and shooting guard from 1961 to 74, 10 times on the All-NBA first team, 2 times on the second team, 21st in win shares and 10th in win shares per 48.
Yeah, it does well.
Yeah.
I was surprised. I thought he did better on the advanced stats than I thought he would, and that's no slight against him, but we're going through this series, and there's guys that I think of and I go, here's a guy where the advanced stats are definitely going to think he's not as good, and no, they think he's better. Okay, never mind. Look, that's fine. That's good. That's why we're doing this exploration. That's why it's fun. But yeah, I thought Jerry West would get docked a little bit by advanced stats, just kind of an opinion coming in, but they weren't at all. So. Hey, go him, and that's I'm glad to see. But yeah, there's no top 50 list without the logo. That'd just be ridiculous. Yeah, unless of course they change the logo, but I don't think they're going to do that. And then we can take them off. No, I'm just joking.
Right.
The Anthony Davis logo that they're rolling out next year. I'm sure
yes.
to anticipate the future.
He might be the next guy. Yeah, you never know. He might be. By the time he's done, maybe we'll be. Maybe when we do this, in 10 years again, maybe we'll be calling for him to be the actual logo. But, so we're excited to do this project. We've got some great shows coming up with Curtis Harris, where we're going to go through all the rest of the top 50 players on the list and kind of go break down their strengths and weaknesses and where we kind of see them standing. And then after that, we're going to try to get guests from all over the basketball world to talk with us about newer players and their cases for being on the list or not being on the list. We're going to talk more about, kind of looking at what stats are best to look at. We're going to try to talk to historians. We're going to try to talk to everybody we can to just get, as many points of view as we can, get as many cases, talk about as many guys as we can. And by the end of it, we're going to try to come up with our own top 50 list and see how we do. And at the very least, it's going to be a lot of fun exploring the past, as we like to do on the show, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I definitely am, and I think this is gonna be a fun examination. And like you said, one of the biggest things that we want to do is get other voices in here, get other people, get other people's opinions. cover every facet of every possible guy we can, and do everything we can and do our due diligence, just not to throw out a list there and go, yeah, this is our list, but to really, really research and really feel at the end super, super comfortable about the list we have. Not saying it's the definitive list, not saying that every other list is awful and this is the one for sure, but I want to feel, I wouldn't feel right if you and I just decided, hey, let's just come up with the top 50. I want to get a ton of different voices, and I'd be interested to see what other people think as well of what their top 50 would be if we were to ask, hey, what's your top 50? And because I think what comes of it, and what we found is coming of it, is you talk. I mean, you're researching these guys, you're looking it up, you're looking at where they fit historically, you're looking at rankings, you're looking at stats, you're reading articles. Like this is probably and hopefully will be the most exhaustive sort of research and exhaustive set of podcasts we've ever done, but that's exactly what we want this to. I mean, that's the fun of this, and hopefully other people find the fun in this too, is like, okay, look, we have the off season, we got some time, don't have to worry about current games, let's go read about the past, let's go look at stats, let's go run some numbers on guys, there's just so much stuff you can do here and so much fun that can be had by looking at the past and looking at the great past as well. I mean, looking at the historically great players and figuring out who's on that great list versus just, I mean, there's a lot of fun in that. I enjoy it, and I hope other people enjoy it too. But I think it's going to be a great series, and I can't wait to see how it all unfolds when it's all said and done. So
yeah, for sure. So, and yeah, I mean, we're up in the air on, we haven't really sat down and looked at like all our choices and seen, who,
it's very fluid. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously these guys will be on, and, there's a few other current players who are definitely going to be on, but there's going to be a lot of spots that are open, and, I'm going to try to, keep it to as late as possible to kind of make those decisions and weigh as many things as possible, and, just see what we can figure out. So, So thanks everyone for checking us out. We'll be back with more shows on this topic soon. You can find us at hardwoodparoxysm.com. We're part of the Podium Game Network. There you can find us on iTunes if you search for Hardwood Paroxysm. We're part of the other great shows that are on that network. And you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Over and Back NBA. And just give us any comments that anything that you want us to talk about, or any feedback. We would greatly appreciate it. Rich, is there anything I'm forgetting?
No, and if you want to be a guest too, if you think, hey, I'm worthy to be a guest, there's this guy I want to talk about. That's something we, as Jason mentioned, we're going to talk about a lot of players, a lot of post 1997 players as well. And if you think you're the definitive, resource on Kevin Garnett or whatever, or Tim Duncan or whatever, we'd love to hear from you. I mean, we have a little pool of guys that we want to interview and we want to talk to. Maybe we're missing somebody. If you say, hey, you can't talk about Kevin Garnett without talking to me, we'd love to have you on. I mean, that's going to be one of the biggest things here is participation among people on Twitter and getting different guests and getting to talk to different voices. I mean, you and I have our opinion, but it'd be great to get other people on here to say, no, here's how it really is, or here's what I think, and here's there's just a lot more fun in that. So absolutely, if you think you're worthy or that you'd like to be a guest or do something, hit us up on Twitter. We'll absolutely add you to the list, and can't guarantee anything, but there's a lot we can do there, and it's going to be fun. So absolutely, Over and Back NBA if you want to hit us up on Twitter. And I think otherwise, Jason, you nailed it all.
All right. Sounds great. So everyone, we'll be back soon. So see you later.